Hello, I'm Jack Foley, and I'm going to read you a little paper I wrote about Frank O'Hara, and it's called Frank O'Hara and the West Coast Poets. And thank you for giving me this chance to propagate my paper. I'm new to this technology, and I hope it's working out well. We will see. Frank O'Hara and the West Coast Poets. When Massimo Bacigalupo asked for my feelings about the relationship of the quintessential New Yorker Frank O'Hara to California's West Coast poets, my thoughts immediately went to the dead. I answered, Frank O'Hara. The two people who would be best to write such a piece are both unfortunately dead, Bill Berkson and Tom Clark. Barbara Guest, also deceased and also a friend of O'Hara's, would have been good as well. And of course Allen Ginsberg, who was not exactly a West Coast poet. Ginsberg's poem, My Sad Self, is both an evocation of O'Hara and an answer to him. Ginsberg told me in an interview I did with him way back in 1996, I'm thinking of O'Hara's walking up Fifth Avenue. I said, but My Sad Self is also the exact opposite of an O'Hara poem. I think when I read your poem of O'Hara's poem Steps, quote, how funny you are today, New York, like Ginger Rogers in Swing Time. Your poem seems the opposite or the complement of that. O'Hara swinging around New York, meeting all kinds of people, doing this and that. Ginsberg, mine is more solitary. Me. And sad. Thinking of yourself as isolated from people, whereas Frank was so social. Ginsberg, except that it's not just thinking of myself. Everybody in New York has at one time or another been alone, walking up Fifth Avenue around Christmas or something like that, feeling the great solitude of the city. That's one of the great experiences of a great megalopolis, feeling one's solitude amid the myriad. Whitman registered it. Everybody registered it. It's not that I'm neurotically sad or even abnormally sad or even average-wise sad. It's a common experience. And it doesn't mean that you're really alone. It doesn't mean that you haven't got your friends and your lovers and your family and all that. It just means that there is this moment when you realize that everyone is ultimately alone, in the grave or in life. And no place more dramatic to realize it than by going window shopping on Upper Fifth Avenue with F.A.O. Schwartz and Cartiers, etc. 57th Street and Fifth Avenue is a place to really experience being alone with the alone. Ginsberg added that though O'Hara was an Eastern poet, he never got very far east. Another poet friend, this one still living, Christian Panzica, tells me he used to hang with O'Hara in New York and thought the world of him. Frank O'Hara's lunch poems, published by San Francisco's City Lights Books in 1964, had an extraordinary effect on everyone who encountered it, myself included. I suspect that Lawrence Ferlinghetti, whose verse tends towards the conversational, was also influenced by lunch poems, and there's a reading series at UC Berkeley, and it's called Lunch Poems. My friend Ivan Arguelles, modeling himself on O'Hara, worked as a research librarian at UC Berkeley and, like O'Hara, wrote poems during his lunch hour. Free verse has always been in a problematical relationship to prose, partly because it is clearly a movement towards prose, scattering the poem's music throughout the poem rather than locating it in a regular meter and end rhyme. O'Hara allows the poem to be conversational rather than lyric, yet maintains interest through his wit and the marvelous specifics of his details. A real man, and, we frequently notice, a gay real man, in a real city. No one had written so, forgive the pun, frankly, and in such a chatty way, about the deeply loved trivialities of a person's life. And of course the poems are full of surprising turns. With this key, O'Hara unlocked his heart. It's a marvelous achievement, though not appreciated by all. Jack Kerouac famously, and with more than a touch of homophobia, yelled out to O'Hara at a reading, "You're ruining American poetry, O'Hara!" To which O'Hara replied, "That's more than you've ever done for it, Kerouac." How marvelous. Poetry suddenly became casual, demotic, enjoyable. What a liberation that was. Like Ginger Rogers in Swing Time. When I mentioned the O'Hara project, Ivan Arguelles responded by sending me a poem he had published in his book Ars Poetica, The Art of Poetry, 2013. Lunch Poems, with its I do this, I do that technique, has a kind of hidden surrealism at its heart, suddenly joining utterly disparate elements as the poet, like Lorca before him, finds his way around New York. Arguelles, who lived in New York for a time, began as a surrealist, and he found his way out and beyond such work. Was art ever so supremely modern? He asks about O'Hara's poetry. I should mention, I'm going to read his poem, but I should mention that Moe's is a famous bookstore located in Berkeley, California. It was run by another dead man, Moe Moskowitz. This is Arguelles' poem, Frank O'Hara. Imagine finding you on the second floor of Moe's in Berkeley, 21st century. Not like the Buddha preaching in Essen, nor like the Encounter in Grand Central, but full impeccably of nostalgia. Was art ever so supremely modern? Nor are the fiery triptychs of memory any more discernible than clouds, the ultimate many, the scattered, the massively random with their tiny moons that clutter the everyday head. Can it be noon on your side of paradise? Longing as the Japanese do for an Arcadia of blank but massive walls rearing their concrete muscles into the orangey of a sky long since abandoned by the Tao. Frank, decades have passed since your stupid death, and none are the wiser for it, but continue to practice a poetry of sorts, without the city of intricate dreams you employed, lunching with angels in traffic and jackhammers and pornographic art shops. How unwholesome the trade of lyrics is, the shameful quotidian of willfully ignoring when beauty has but to shove an index finger into the iota of their thoughtlessness and to point brightly to the sun, really unabashed on its pointillistic horizon, like dawn such as had happened to you repeatedly, elegant in trousers flaming like Mayakovsky, or for that matter, Lorca in his Nueva York, of albino lovers and sudden surrealism in the Cedar Tavern, or uptown with the art people, drunk and nibbling on Hans Harp cheese. Can it, for that matter, be so different today? The buzz of wireless cell phone conversation, or the immediate fall of the Dow 10,000 points a minute until somewhere below nadir. Lady Murasaki takes you by the lapels and shakes you awake from silken drowsiness, forgetting how to use the honorific pronoun. Because in you, the urgent is at once distance, and the ever unfulfilled last poem, written on the back of a napkin before lipstick was invented, or darkness inside a phone booth. That was Arguelles' poem. And finally, O'Hara and his stupid death and his I do this, I do that technique were probably behind this poem of mine from my recent book, When Sleep Comes, Shillelagh Songs, especially since I referenced something O'Hara's friend Barbara Guest said to me. She said to me, "You've always known how to free your mind." That remark comes back throughout my poem. Freeway Incident. As I drove the poet Arguelles home yesterday, the poet Barbara Guest said to me, "You have always known how to free your mind." We saw by the side of the freeway, on a little hillock, a dead deer. You have always known how to free your mind. Beautiful, young, a female. Arguelles and I had been talking about death and grief and how the mind denies, accepts, denies, accepts. You have always known how to free your mind. Denies, accepts the immense fact of obliteration, though it is a mystery and a terror. As we drove, I said, "Look!" And there death was, beautiful, young, almost as if sleeping, though we knew better. Like an image from a painting or a film. And we spoke a little and drove on. You have always known how to free your mind, beyond the dead deer, beyond our conversation. You have always known how to free your mind. And vicious night began endlessly to fall. That's what I had to say about Frank O'Hara. There's more to say. There's always more to say. Thank you for listening.